People do business with people that they know and that they trust. That was one of the first lessons I learned in business. You can't just be transactional. You got to cultivate, develop, and build relationships that will last you over a sustained period to help you achieve your business goals. Welcome to our sponsor mini-series. This mini-series is designed to give you a deeper insight into 4 categories: workforce development, technology, risk management and insurance, and third-party administration. You're going to get an insight into the people and the products that's bringing the value to your business. Now, if you're like me, one thing I hate is to be sold something. It just doesn't feel right. Just give me the real answers. I'm going to ask the tough questions. Show me what you can do and what you can't do, and I'll make my own informed decision. And sometimes we'll find out if the solution doesn't work for you, but we're going to go deep. And if you find this interesting or you want to learn more, check out our sponsors in deeper detail. Go to their websites. But when you call them, make sure you use that L12 discount code because, they're giving you free money. You might as well use it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the mini-series. I'm Jason Burns, your host on Last2First, and I'm excited for you to learn, uncover, and discover what can work best on your Last2First journey.
Hi, I'm David Pickerel, the founder and CEO of GigSafe, and you're watching the Last2First Podcast.
All right, we are back with our next episode. It's a mini-series. We've got an exciting one today. So as I mentioned before, we are going to do something different in season 2, which we're going to have a few vendors of ours who are looking to tell you more about their business, more about the value proposition they bring to the last mile, final miles, and just the entire logistics world here on the episode with us. So on this episode, I'm joined with David Pickerel, who is the founder and CEO of GigSafe. GigSafe is one of the leading third-party administrators in the final mile, last mile gig space. And so we're very excited to have him on the episode. David, welcome to Last2First Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I know I'm a fan of all the episodes, and you have a bunch of the GigSafe team members who watch every episode you've released.
I think I do. Most of my comments come from the GigSafe team, so I appreciate you guys being on. Appreciate the love and support.
I know we have at least 2 team members who watch every single one. So
we got some fans. All right. Yeah. Well, look, so I know we've been talking about doing this for a little while, and as I said, I'm glad to have you on the episode. But let's start with just how you got to GigSafe. So you have a pretty interesting story and kind of your background and kind of your origins. Tell us a little bit how you got to where you are today.
Yes, I think it really started back in 2015. So at the time I was sort of younger, sort of early 20s. I worked in Las Vegas, of all places.
Las Vegas.
I was working for a casino doing finance, right? I sort of got really lucky and sort of had this opportunity dropped out of the sky where I was recruited by Uber to help launch Uber in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And it's sort of one of those, like, life takes you in paths you don't expect,
yeah.
right? Because, like, they like the fact I worked at a casino, which is how I got that opportunity or why they'd reached out. Right. So, was sort of recruited to join Uber in Las Vegas. And, we went there. We helped lobby the government. We had to set up the airport, negotiate with the airport. I had to strike a deal. We had to strike a deal with like every single casino on the strip.
To get the access to pick up.
Yeah. So if you go to Vegas and you have to get picked up in an annoying spot, I'm sorry, but that was the best we could negotiate. Right. So, and I'm sure, as you can imagine, Vegas is a crazy market, right? Taxis were powerful. At the time, we had Uber pool. Imagine 3 drunk people getting into an Uber pool together and not knowing each other at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And it was just sort of like a wild, but that's really sort of where I got my first opportunity and sort of cut my teeth into logistics, right?
Got it.
And I think, we went from, in the first 2 months, 0 drivers to, 100-something thousand drivers working a week. Wow. Basically, right? Wow. And people think of Uber now as this sort of like super automated app. But I think what I learned was, those 100-something thousand drivers were onboarded the hard way, right?
So you're on the ground
level. Yeah. So, we had a support team that would onboard the drivers, review the documents. Drivers would come in for support, all of that, right? So at least for us, is like the first couple thousand drivers you sort of knew, because, your part of the team had personally onboarded them, basically.
Yeah. There was there's a docuseries on the early start of Uber back in San Francisco, not in Vegas. But I remember, you may know the lady's name, who was like the first one that would recruit the limousine drivers.
Yes.
And I remember like some of the scenes where she's like going out there in the field and she's, it's like she's guerrilla warfare. She's out there hunting. They're fighting for drivers, for market share on drivers. Yeah. Was that kind of the experience in Vegas?
When I was in 2015, when she was doing that, it was probably 2012 or 2013.
Yeah.
So Uber was a bigger company by then, right? So respect to the people who did it a couple of years before, that was hard. Mm-hmm. But from our end, same thing, new city, we were competing. I lost a lot of sleep thinking that taxi could have checkmated us. So this is maybe I'm a little OCD like this, right? But like my worry was we just launched Uber on the first week, and the rumors are always the taxi industry was related to the mafia, right?
Sure.
So in my mind, I always thought there's one thing that could checkmate us. So if they took a guy and said, hey, you're going to sign up for Uber, you're going to go to prison for 5 years, but we're going to pay you $1 million. And all he had to do was live stream himself beating up an Uber rider on the Las Vegas Strip. And I was like, if you just did that, it would be game over. We'd get kicked out. We'd be out of this for years. Never quite happened, right? But really, our big battle then was with Lyft, actually, right? So Lyft was in the city too. We took differing approaches. So we went for the Strip and really focused on big events, CES, conferences. They really sort of focused on the local market, dealing with the folks who live in Las Vegas all the time. And that was sort of at the peak of the competition. So we, at the beginning, ran a pretty healthy business. We actually ran a 30% margin business. So people don't realize this, that without subsidies, Uber is actually it's a pretty good business. But then Lyft started offering 50% off. And for a couple months, we didn't match it because we're like, this is a race to the bottom. But guess what? When you offer 50% off, you start winning market share.
Yeah.
But also, if your margin's 30% and they're giving away 50%, do the math, right?
Don't last too long.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was sort of one of our main focuses, was sort of Uber versus Lyft, basically, at that time.
Just to talk deep into that. So, because that's I know we're here talking from a TPA standpoint, but just going back to Uber and Lyft, and are they economically viable? Are they financially viable, right?
Yeah.
The business model. I don't know how much you follow it now. You're still maybe an investor, but because this segues into the last mile world too, is you have to maintain profitability. We'll get into how your solution does help to offer some cost reduction strategies too.
Yep.
But from what you see from an overall gig space, do you see the industry continue to grow, evolve profitably?
That's a good question. I think if you're a driver, back when I was working there in 2015, they were making a lot of money. So we were paying drivers a lot of money and charging riders not a lot of money. Basically, right? So that's why famously we burned a lot of money.
Yeah.
On the driver's side, we were sort of like crazy with incentives. So I was spending a couple $100,000 a week just getting drivers to drive more, just for my market. That's just for Las Vegas, basically, right? We were doing that in sort of every city.
Yeah.
I think Uber did sort of figure it out this last year, but what they did was pay drivers less, charge riders more, and sort of there's some more details in there. But they've managed to find a way to do it profitably. But if you're a driver, it hasn't been that great.
Hasn't been great.
Years.
Yeah. The segue. So you're at Uber for how long were you there? At Uber?
2 years.
A couple years. Okay. And then you transitioned away from Uber and you started your first startup, or?
I did. So I had some time in between where I worked on other things, but really sort of fast forward the story, I guess, to COVID. It was the beginning of COVID, and when I worked at Uber, 20% of the drivers at Uber worked at Lyft, but that was sort of it. And sort of realized that at the beginning of COVID, gig drivers were working on a lot more platforms. Right. So what I suddenly saw was an Uber driver not only worked on Lyft, but Uber and Lyft drivers suddenly didn't have work. So they were forced to try out DoorDash, forced to try out Instacart, forced to try out Uber Eats.
Yeah.
I used to hear this a lot in rideshare when we first launched food delivery. I was like, I'm not your pizza delivery boy. But suddenly in COVID, everybody had to become the pizza delivery boy. Right. So we just noticed suddenly the average gig worker was working from 1.1 apps to 4, 5, 6 apps. I think the other thing I noticed was gig was starting to spread into more and more of the last mile, other sorts of tangential industries.
Sure.
So we really just noticed the average gig worker was working on many apps at this point. So we, it was beginning of COVID, I was bored. My roommate and I tried to build some tools to basically say, hey, can we, help these workers manage work across multiple apps?
Right.
So that's really sort of the last company I started, Para. So we basically created an app where you could connect Uber, Uber Eats, Lyft, Grubhub, DoorDash, etc., all your work in one feed. So basically, all your pings come into one place.
Okay.
You could set some parameters and basically say, hey, I don't want to travel more than 5 miles. I don't want to take less than $2 a mile. I don't want to pick up from McDonald's, right? And we'd basically auto-accept or decline work based off of your parameters.
Okay.
And it proved to be pretty popular. Right, so at our peak, we had almost, we call it 380,000 weekly active drivers using the system.
Wow. So Pat, it was like a job funnel too? Like it's jobs to these drivers, or it allows you to push them drivers into these other apps?
At first, it was just a tool to help make their life easier. So just like manage your work in one place. You have 7 apps yelling at you.
Got it.
Right? While you're driving on the road in the rain. Tell us what you want and we'll reject the stuff you don't want.
Got it. Okay.
Right? So that's really where it started.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just like make it safer to drive. And I mean, you've seen this. Anyone listening, like you've been in an Uber and they have the 2 phones and they're tapping and swiping. But imagine that with 7 apps.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
Right? It's crazy. Right?
It's crazy.
And maybe I was sort of naive being like, that's the sort of thing a computer can solve. Right? It's not too hard.
Yeah.
Turned out to be pretty hard. But like, I think it's what I learned.
Yeah.
But, once we ended up having a couple 100,000 workers on the system, we're like, what do these workers care about? They care about finding more work.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the segue into how I am now here talking to you and sort of last mile.
Yeah.
So we're basically like, these folks want to find better work than DoorDash and Uber Eats and Grubhub. What is work that is driving, that pays better? And we went out and just started to talk to a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Right. So
what year is this when you're kind of starting or transitioning from Para to GigSafe?
So we built the driver tools from 20 to 2022.
Okay.
And we still had the tools. We started, which is not transitioned to GigSafe yet, but as part of Para, we're like, can we find other good work? So we went out and we found catering companies. We went out and we found companies that would do food delivery at a basketball stadium. We went and found companies that would do merchandising in a Target, like, go count the beauty products and stock them. We found a bunch of these different companies that needed workers, and we'd say, hey, you need workers. We have a bunch of people who want work.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
Right. We had a bunch of these different types of 1099 work, and the workers liked it. Right. But I think what we found was for the companies that had specifically good work, it was hard for them to onboard drivers well. So what I mean by that is we found the niche that a lot of listeners here would know is like medical delivery. Like medical delivery is great compared to it pays almost twice what delivering food does.
Sure.
But we'd go to a medical company and say you need 100 drivers. In LA we got 10,000. Here's 100, right? And we've already scanned their IDs. We have their vehicle we had their vehicle registration. We have their insurance. We know they're good to go.
Yeah.
Here you go.
You kind of credentialed them.
Yeah, we'd already credentialed them, exactly. So we're like, you need 100 folks, we got 100 folks, boom.
Match
right? Then we came back a month later, and I'm like, how's it going? And they're like, oh, it's great, like 2 of them are working. I'm like, what do you mean 2 of them are working? Like, you needed 100, we sent you 100, they're good to go. And this kept happening, basically. It's like, we noticed that, and it was sort of made me shocked, because I was like, we've already credentialed them, we already have all the information. I was sort of the naive tech guy that's like, hey, I can just give you the profile, plug them into your TMS, and let's get going.
Yeah.
Right? And I think what I learned was there's a bunch of steps in between just here's a profile and getting them onto the TMS. There's other specific credentials. How do they get HIPAA? How do they get bloodborne pathogen? There's sort of the human review or human interview process there. There's how do they get the right insurance? Suddenly they need, while under dispatch or some other insurance that they didn't have ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And frankly, the other thing I found was just a lot of folks did this the old-fashioned way, manually, or with older software.
Yeah.
That was just slow. And so I'd spent a year or 2 trying to patch systems. So I would say, hey, I have a profile. Your system's not fast enough. Let me make it better.
Yeah.
And after a year or 2 of trying to make these systems better, basically took a step back and said, you know what? Like, why don't I build the system? So that's really sort of the path to us being here.
Yeah.
But you'll see sort of it started in a casino and somehow ended up here, right? So
well, I think it's from my experience, right? So running my business and some of the pain points you're hinting on right now. And what we always would tell clients and customers, the difference between our solution, our being like final mile versus gig, right there. I think I still can draw a little distinction between the two.
Yeah.
But it comes down on the driver and the driver's qualifications, the skills, the certifications they may need to do deliveries in our space, because anyone can go pick up an order from Chick-fil-A and drop it up to your house.
Yeah.
Not everyone can go move, a critical item, blood, specimens, lab samples, organs. You have radioactive, pharmaceuticals that are being moved. So it takes a lot longer on the onboarding side. So you can't just, Uber, Lyft. I think I always hear like you can get a driver kind of onboarded within a matter of hours, right? In our world, we always say it takes at least days. Right? We want to sit down and talk to you. We want to make sure you're trained. We probably want to do a ride along and make sure you understand where to go in the hospital. So a lot of different things go into those nuances, go into it, which I think that's always been something that's helped to separate us from our gig competitors. But it does make the onboarding compliance a little more tricky because there's so many things you got to jump through and hurdles, which is where you kind of ended up in trying to say, I got to solve this bigger problem.
I really agree. And what I was like, not if you take the population of the, 380,000 gig workers we had, 10% of them would be cut out to do the last mile pharmaceutical delivery. Most of them aren't, right? I mean, if you're going to drop loads, if you're going to cancel last second, if you're not be committed, not the job for you. But the top 10%, a good driver is a good driver, right? And I think what I found was you'd have drivers who've done 20, 30, 50,000 trips. We know they're really good. We've sent them to other platforms to work. They would just run into, they're probably a really good fit for your work, but not days. I mean, y'all may have been efficient, but some of these processes take weeks. A lot of companies were just losing amazing folks because these drivers, like it or not, they'd been trained on faster, more modern, more mobile-friendly systems. Right. So people were losing out on good folks who probably were a fit for that job because it took weeks. I'm agreeing with you. It's probably not going to take hours, but it should take days, not weeks.
Sure. So tell me, so when you transition to you fully going and you realize you have to solve this maybe larger problem. What are the first things you're looking at, the pain points you're trying to solve from a tech compliance onboarding standpoint? What makes the GigSafe solution different?
I think one thing to add right before that too is we actually started our own delivery service very briefly.
Oh, okay. So, I think I heard about this. Okay.
Yeah. So we actually had a customer who wanted hospice pharmaceuticals delivered.
Okay.
And we basically decided to step into the game, right? So Jimmy on my team, basically I tasked him with setting up our delivery service. So he was the one man who onboarded, he recruited drivers, he credentialed the drivers, he paid the drivers, he managed the drivers, scheduled the drivers, all of that. And we actually did pretty well. Him as a one-guy team, we ended up in a year getting to a $580,000 a year revenue business, basically with a 30% gross margin. So it was good, right? It was a good business. It was only one customer, and that customer actually wanted us to expand to 40 states. But I think we had that decision matrix of are we a delivery company or are we going to be a software company? But the good thing is we learned a lot from having to step up that experience, basically, right? So I think that really sort of taught us, okay, this is different than onboarding gig drivers. What would we need to build to have supported the delivery service we built?
Right.
We actually also, frankly, and people sort of kick me now because a lot of customers I would have liked that revenue. We actually ended up convincing a company to be our first customer for GigSafe and to meet with us every couple of weeks to help build the system. To help sort of make it better, to give us feedback. And in exchange, we just gave them
the business,
that shipper, basically.
Smart. Bought her some business for a new client.
Yeah, and also just sort of at the beginning of building a new thing, customer feedback's the most important thing you can get, right? So for me, it's 100%. Hey, if I can give you this revenue and you're willing to meet with me and help build this out, that's how you build something good.
100%.
Right?
So let's talk about what you built. So this is episode 1. We got 2 other episodes to get into, but I really want to understand kind of what makes the GigSafe solution different.
So we built the easiest way in one place to onboard drivers quickly and efficiently, to credential drivers. Specifically, we have HIPAA, bloodborne pathogen, TSA certification, just anything you need to credential the driver, to maintain compliance. So we'll automatically scan all the driver's documents, we'll recollect all those documents for you, and we'll plug into your TMS and ensure that a non-compliant driver can't be dispatched. We have the easiest way to pay. So same day ACH, next day ACH, push to debit immediate. There's even some float options there. And then that sort of segued us into, and the easiest way for the workers to get insured and for you as a company to get better insurance rates, basically, because of the demonstrated compliance from the system. So each of these individually exists. You could go get a applicant tracking system. You could go get a payment system. But I think the beauty of what we've done is stitch it together in a really seamless way that works out of the box, so you just don't have to worry about it.
So I want to touch on a couple of those because, again, going back to pain points I experienced and working in this industry and with obviously hundreds of ICs and different to help us stay compliant, right? Because that's a huge thing. Obviously, the biggest thing most people worry about in this world is misclassification. I have a driver that is classified as an independent contractor, 1099. I want to make sure I'm doing everything I need to do by the letter of the law to make sure I don't get misclassified, have them misclassified as a W-2 employee. So working with a third-party administrator helps to kind of keep those checks and balances in place. But then you get into, once you get that part solved, you get into some of the issues and pain points. You mentioned paying drivers, right?
Yep.
When we operated, we paid drivers bi-weekly. Towards the end of that, we had a lot of pressure because the world was changing.
Yep.
Drivers were getting used to coming from an Uber, coming from a Lyft, and get paid same day.
Yep.
I want to talk more about how you actually solve that. And then the other one is, you mentioned very quickly, but it's a big point, which is making sure that the system you're operating, the TMS system, your dispatch operating system, your transportation management system, is synced with this compliance tool. Because if a driver is not compliant, insurance is not up to date, or they don't have the right credential for a type of service, we don't need dispatchers, dispatching orders to drivers who are not compliant. That puts us in harm's way. So just go be a little deeper into both of those two, into how you actually have solved the payment side as well as the integrating the dispatch systems.
Yeah, so I like what you said about right before that, even about the third-party administrator, right? So, we can be, sort of that layer between you and the driver. We can, in some cases, even sort of issue the 1099, pay the driver on your behalf. My initial hypothesis was that would be what most customers are interested in. Mm-hmm. What I've actually found is that sort of the stuff we then built around it, that ended up being more interesting for a lot of customers. So like the 3PA side of things, I get it, I like it, but it's all these other things that actually get me interested into switching into the system, which is actually not what I expected when we first started it.
Okay.
Right? And I think something that differentiates us is we're also saying, hey, we don't have to be the 3PA. You just want to do onboarding and payments, you can do it. You want to do onboarding, payments, credentialing, you can do it. You want to plug into the TMS, you can do it. If you'd like, we could also wrap it all together into being the 3PA.
Yeah.
But let's talk on payments, right? So as part of onboarding, the driver can select how they want to get paid.
Okay.
Do they enter a debit card and get pushed to debit, which is instant? It works on weekends, basically up to 30 minutes, but practically usually 30 seconds.
So the driver finishes an order and they can say, I want to get paid.
Not that. We sort of flipped it the other way, which is you can go in and click pay to a driver.
Okay.
And it will happen instantly, basically.
Okay.
Or the driver can say, hey, I want to get paid via ACH. That's either same day or next day, usually.
Okay.
I think one of the ways we flipped it, there's two ways for our customers to do payments. Customers can send us money in a bank account and then click to send out to pay. Mm-hmm. But we have another option, which is quite popular, where actually you can just click pay. We issue an invoice. It's through a third party, not on our balance sheet, but effectively you can pay that invoice the same day, no charge. Okay. But you can effectively pay it any day you want to in the next 30 days. There's a 0.1% per day, basically.
Okay. Yep.
But, that's sort of the third party providing some float basically. Yeah. So when you talk about it's hard to switch to paying drivers the same day, we have a solution for that, basically, where we're like, the third party can pay it, and you can decide how many days later you want to pay it back, basically.
I love that. That was not available, a handful of years ago before we sold our business. And it's in this business, like, drivers are gold. Yeah. Right. Yeah, you talk to any owner in our space.
Good drivers are gold.
Good drivers. Yeah. I would always call them, actually say we want to find professional drivers. We just didn't want a driver. We wanted professional couriers, what we actually would say back in QCS days. But that payment solution is huge because cash flow is king, not just to the business, but to these drivers. These drivers are out there, these ladies and gentlemen, 24/7 out there making it happen. And, oftentimes they need a little extra money for the wear and tear on a vehicle, or fuel is the biggest one, right? And so being able to get them money quickly keeps them active, keeps them rolling, keeps them getting paid, less stress on the business.
Especially if your business is growing. So, you're being paid on net 30, net 45, net 15 terms, and the business is growing and you're trying to pay same day or twice a week.
Yeah.
If you're growing slowly, less of a problem.
Sure.
Let's say you suddenly land a big account, the cash flow can be a crunch, right?
100%. And then the last one on the, what made you go down and solve the problem of making sure that the system could talk to the dispatch software? Yeah,
so I think, to be honest, that's sort of where, if you think about it, we built integrations into Uber Eats, Lyft, Grubhub, DoorDash. Integrations are sort of in our DNA. Yeah. That was what I would say we're actually sort of the best at, right, as a company. But when we first built the system, I thought that would be a really important thing. So like once a driver's on board in the system, we automatically register them in the TMS. They get a text saying, here's your login information. You can start going in. And the ability to toggle off the dispatch. To be honest, it actually took us a good year to convince folks to buy into this. Because folks are like, my dispatcher will be mad if he can't dispatch somebody, basically, right? And I think, which I get, right? Like, they just need to get the job done, right? So I totally get it. But I think where it really switched was people started to realize insurance prices are going up. And we were able to actually go to a couple insurance markets and say, hey, this system demonstrates continuous compliance. And you get better insurance rates because of that, right? Really sort of being that goal. And I think as people have seen compliance become more of a thing, insurance rates go up. We've started to have more owners buy into, hey, can you just do this for me, basically, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, right now we're sort of, launching a CXT integration. We're actively working on Accelerator, eCourier, talking to Bean. So we're plugging into all of them.
Yeah.
Basically. So whatever your TMS is, on fleet we have experience with, Cartwheel, ShipDay, we're already integrated with. So from our perspective, it's protect yourself on the compliance side, but also just make your life a little easier.
Yeah. 100%.
Right? A lot of the time it's the dispatcher's not. Some dispatchers are sending somebody that's not compliant, but a lot of the time how the system works right now is they have a sheet that says these people are not compliant. And when they need to live in their TMS and they need to look at the TMS and look at the sheet and just,
they're gonna,
it's hard.
They're gonna get the job done. So having the ability to have the system automatically restrict them.
Yep.
Right?
And I think the main thing too is I don't want to restrict it. I actually want people to never be non-compliant. Right. So our system will look at all of the expiry dates, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, wherever you want to set it, and just automatically follow up on your behalf, basically, right? So my goal is
to the
actually,
driver. So kind of keep pinging the driver to make sure they have everything they need in.
Correct.
To
So
keep them away from a non-compliant state.
Exactly. Right. So it's not just I don't want to stop you from dispatching. My goal is actually to make sure that you can always dispatch everybody all the time because they're always compliant.
Yeah. And you mentioned insurance. We're going to talk about the next episode. So it'll be a good segue to get into there because we want to talk about what the other products you actually bring to the table outside of just the onboarding compliance piece. I think that's a big part of the value prop. But I think it's a good stopping point for us for episode 1. We've got David Pickerel with us with GigSafe, and we just got a good taste of how he got to this place in time. Incredible background experience working with Uber, Para, and then now getting into the world of true third-party administrator with some delivery experience under his belt. Built a 580,000 plus delivery company with a one-man shop. That's not bad. It's impressive. So, David, we'll have you back here for episode 2. Thanks for episode 1. Appreciate it. And we'll see you in a second.
Thank you.
Managing independent contractors and gig workers is tough. Between onboarding, compliance, insurance, and payments, it's a lot to handle. And one mistake can put your delivery business in jeopardy of a major misclassification claim. That's where GigSafe comes in. Your all-in-one solution for managing 1099 workers seamlessly and cost-effectively. Get drivers onboarded in days, not weeks. Automate compliance and save up to 40% on insurance. Turn compliance into your competitive advantage. Visit gigsafe.com and give them the L2F discount code to get your first month's invoice totally free. Now back to Last2First.